Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And just happened hours ago, Bill Cosby was released on, I'll say, a technicality in terms of his trial, which, I don't know, time flies sometimes. I don't know, probably got sent up about 3 years ago, something of that nature.
2 years.
But how long ago?
2 years.
2 years. Okay, 2 years ago. And really kind of interesting, as an aside, I was watching Comedy Central with someone at that time before he got convicted, and I knew nothing about this. And he was in front of a younger audience, and it was all clean and really good-natured humor. And I go, wow, this guy's really good. I mean, he's in front of a really young, audience, and it's so refreshing that there's nothing about sex or this or that. And then a week later, the accusations come out. But the real point of the whole Cosby situation is, in America, and I'd like your opinion on this, Dr. Lopkin, I think race is really secondary. Not that doesn't come up, it comes up. It's more economic privilege and racial privilege. I mean, you or I sitting in the same cell, deservingly so, are still not going to be out. He had a team of lawyers working on appeals. You and I would be, okay, enjoy yourself for the next 30 years. Your opinion.
Right. If you're poor, you get the public defender who has 100 other cases. But because he is Bill Cosby, he was able to have that team of lawyers going over everything, filing the appeals. And yes, it is economic privilege. And I think that's a lot more common than what people are calling white privilege.
I don't think it's even more common. I think it's 100% more prevalent. I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Again, there's absolutely racism, but I think I don't understand. I want your opinion. I'm sure our listeners would as well. Like, why are we so focused on race? And it's really economic privilege, which is real.
Well, because first of all, racism has become a buzzword. And like most buzzwords, it's starting to lose all meaning, because that calling something racist is the quickest way to shut down an argument. Because if you disagree with someone, you go, oh, well, that's racist. Well, now, how do you prove it's not racist? It's very difficult to prove a negative. So the left has used this as a weapon. And unfortunately, the result of it is that they call everything racist. And now real racism, which, let's face it, is out there, is being swept under the table.
Yeah, but it's out there in decreasing numbers. There's whack jobs, some wacko, the Klan or whatever. But your average person, everyone has some racial bias. That's human nature. But in terms of racism, that train left the station, I'm going to say 20 years ago. Same with the the lesbian and gay situation.
Well, actually
I don't know too many people that really.
Actually, I'm going to call you on that, because I just literally 2 hours ago had a conversation with a financial analyst who happens to be a lesbian, and she was actually telling me that when she became a financial analyst not that long ago, a lot of the firms that she was interviewing with were anti-lesbian, anti-gay. So it's still out there.
I'll defer to your experience, but in terms of my circle of friends, when I grew up, went to high school in the mid to late 70s. If you were a gay man, gay boy, even in a upper middle class school district like I was a part of, you got hell to pay. I mean, that was real and tragic in high school now, and in people I know. I don't know anyone that really has any bias at all about someone who's gay, but
it's definitely less prevalent. And I think it also has to do with age. Younger people are much more tolerant, much less, prejudiced against sexuality, race, whatever the dividing line is, than, say, senior citizens, older people that grew up with prejudice being a lot more acceptable.
I would agree. I think that's true, not only in the gay,
no, that's
community,
across,
but across everything. I would agree with that. The real question politically, though, Dr. Lopkin, is the left has been using racism. Talk about time. It's gotten 20 years now. It's increasing, obviously, as they become more desperate, as they lose middle America. But when does that start losing its effect? I mean, there is a point of, that you go beyond a certain point of reality.
It's actually already started to have an effect, because as
diminishing returns, yes.
Yeah, but as schools are trying to teach critical race theory, you're seeing more and more African American parents standing up and say, no, you are not going to teach my kids that they're oppressed. They can do everything a white kid can do, and you are not going to put them down this way. And you're seeing this across the country. We saw it in New York City. We've seen it red state, blue state, California, Texas. It's becoming more and more prevalent that African American families are standing up against this, because they're saying, no, you are minimizing actual racism with this bull, and it's got to come to an end.
I think you bring something up that I wasn't going to discuss, but I think it's certainly warranted, and I think your point is more than well-founded. Isn't it, I think, and you tell me about my theory, I think the Great Society enslaved, I hate to use that word, a large portion of the Black community in perpetual dependency. And then, especially over the last 10 years, maybe longer, you see more and more Blacks being entrepreneurs, being self-directed, leaving, if you will, the Democratic/liberal reservation. Isn't this whole wokeism and hyper-vigilance on racial identity a way of keeping them in check? They're leaving. There's more of them becoming conservative. Or they're thinking, I'm just as intelligent. I'm just as ambitious. I don't need this nonsense. And they're proving it. And all of a sudden, I think the Democrats who have been using them for 50 years are panicking. Am I inaccurate in that assessment?
No, I think you are accurate. The Democrats want to keep not just African Americans or Hispanics, they want to keep people down. Their focus is making people dependent on government, because that's basically the platform that they've run on for the last 25 years, which is essentially, well, you know what? We're going to give you money. You vote for us. That's the deal. But it really is backfiring, because people don't want to be dependent, and they're starting to realize, there's been a lot in the news lately about voter registration laws and voter laws. And the Democrats have been leaning on the fact, they say, well, you shouldn't have to prove who you are. You shouldn't need ID. And a lot of them have gone so far as to say, well, it's hard to get ID cards for minorities. Really? How racist is that you think they're not capable of getting a state ID or a driver's license?
I agree with that 100%, Dr. Lopkin. When I was 16 years old, basically could barely mow the lawn. In other words, I was like having fun like every other. I think I got a driver's license. It wasn't that hard, and I was no rocket scientist.
Yeah, and in fact,
so it is. It's very racially biased to saying these people are incapable of having. You don't even need just any kind of form of ID, really. They're that inept.
That's what they're fighting for. The Democrats want to remove voter ID laws. Now, we're broadcasting this from Connecticut. Connecticut is a very liberal state, maybe one of the top 3 or 4 liberal states in the country. And yet, when we go to the voting booth, we have to show identification. So this is not about racism. That issue is not about, access to voting. The removal of voter ID is very simply the Democrats are terrified to let people vote. They want to be able to commit voter fraud.
Without any question. Now, on the same issue of the Democrats, I think one thing I do enjoy a good laugh or two, and I think the Biden administration, the Harris-Biden administration, is providing an increasing amount of that. In fact, if Johnny Carson, who I'm sure you remember, was around, a fair-minded, great late-night comedian, not like the hacks we have now, would have a field day with Biden and Harris. But that can't happen with Colbert and the other knuckleheads. But yes, it looks like Harris went to the border, and maybe you can explain to our listeners how effective that journey was.
Yes, Kamala Harris finally gave in and took her trip to the border. And I say trip to the border, I put this in air quotes, because in actuality, she was nowhere near the border. In fact, the lieutenant governor of Texas made a statement, to put this in context. Kamala Harris went to El Paso. El Paso is as far away from the border crossings where the crisis is happening as Philadelphia is from Atlanta. So she was nowhere near the border. She went to a processing facility in El Paso. There was a tent city where immigrants are being housed. They're packed in there. We've seen the photos of, too many people overcrowded in these tents and fenced in. This facility was 6 miles away from the El Paso airport where she flew into, and she didn't even go there. And quite frankly, it's, pundits on all sides, NPR, CNN went after her because it was very obvious that the only reason she actually went even as far as she did is because President Trump announced he will be at the border this week.
No question about it. And she's increasingly, it is increasingly apparent that she is not ready for prime time. And I believe the Biden administration or the operatives behind him knew that they have a real clinker on their hands. I mean, there's no way she could stand up to the bright lights of a real inquiry, could she?
No. If the press had been throwing questions at her like they did Trump, she would have fallen apart. And it's starting to show because, again, with this border trip, you don't get too much more liberal than CNN and NPR. And even they refused to carry her water. They went after her. So you're starting to see even the most liberally biased media going, all right, enough is enough. This is ridiculous.
Well, one thing more before we move on. I do believe that with liberalism, liberal media, liberal politics, they always have an agenda. Like they did with Carter. Once they know you're weak and of no further use to them, I believe their agenda now is to minimize her, marginalize her, because they want someone else in there for 2024. That is what I truly believe. If she seemed capable, had the adulation of the populace, completely different narrative. It would be super Kamala. She's amazing. Look what she went to El Paso. No, they know that, okay, this ain't ready for prime time. Let's get rid of it. Well, final comment on that.
It's even more than that, because they're already starting to be whispers that Joe Biden is not going to run for re-election in 2024. They can't hand the ticket over to Harris because they know she'll be obliterated in a general. So I think you're going to see something in 2024 that's almost unheard of, and that is a serious primary challenge to an incumbent president.
That was my whole point that you just articulated, was they know they have to induce battle damage to her. Not that she's doing it not on her own anyway, but they know that if we put her up against anyone except Colonel Sanders, we are screwed, and that's why they're going after her. It's not because they've all of a sudden seen the light of neutrality. No, it's they know they're taking care of their own. And speaking of the media, which I always love to talk about, because I think we talked about it when we were on terrestrial radio, and we were talking about CNN had such an amazing opportunity because you had MSNBC on the left, Fox on the right. What a great opportunity to capture maybe 80% of the marketplace. Obviously, they failed in that, and they're failing now, aren't they?
Yes, the new ratings came out. CNN is getting just over half of the audience that Fox is bringing in. MSNBC is doing even worse because audiences are saying these outlets have absolutely no credibility anymore. And in fact, we talked about this a few days ago. I showed you an article. A federal judge who was appointed by Obama, so that's important, heard a defamation case against Rachel Maddow. Basically, Rachel Maddow had insulted AON, which is a conservative network, on the air.
Mm-hmm.
They sued her for defamation of character, and the judge actually sided with Rachel Maddow, saying it wasn't defamation of character. But the reason the judge gave is because Rachel Maddow's audience knows she is not a news person. She's just spouting opinions. So, I mean, to paraphrase, the judge actually said Rachel Maddow is fake news.
Oh, no, it's and I have to say, going back in a time machine, I don't know, I actually watched MSNBC. It had some, believe it or not, some decent shows. I'm sorry. Not just because I have more, I'm more conservative. It is the worst, how anyone could watch that dribble. There is not one coherent host. It is, and I can understand why it did, or it kept above board when Trump was in office, because you had Trump haters, and he brought it on himself, and they'd watch and get, this. But with him out, there's nothing to watch, to your point. What are you going to watch? Rachel Maddow talking about what?
And that's why their ratings have dropped. And we talked about this when Biden was first elected. We predicted on this podcast that CNN and MSNBC were going to start seeing their ratings fall through the basement. And sure enough, they are. In fact, there is a conservative commentator named Tim Pool. He has a YouTube channel. His YouTube channel gets more viewers than CNN does.
Oh, no, it's so crazy. We're broadcasting from Connecticut. I mean, you could make a point that not the evening news, the 5 o'clock news on Channel 3 might get like a quarter or 15% of the viewers of CNN. I mean, it's pretty bad when you. Their morning show. No, it's really possible. It's not a joke. Like their morning show, they got this uber liberal. I don't remember her name. Her ratings have dropped. It's like 250,000. That's a national show. Then you take away airports and barbershops. I mean, literally, you're talking about people that have actually tuned in, maybe like 50,000.
Yeah, and that's
pretty
what
scary.
You're seeing across the media, is that people are starting to go, okay, you know what? You're not news. You're just spouting, in many cases, abject lies. We are not watching. And more people are tuning them out, turning into YouTube channels, podcasts, because there's people out there who are actually doing their homework, looking at the facts, reporting them. And that has not been the national news anymore.
You know something, Lopkin, to kind of close, sometimes you just bring up excellent points that you just really kind of have to expound on. I believe we are part of, and I believe we are witnessing the next phase of news. I think we're talking about people moving to what you said, YouTube channels, podcasts. I mean, they already are, but I think increasingly it was network news became kind of irrelevant. 60 plus was watching, the 7 o'clock news with whatever. Okay. It's almost irrelevant. I think CNN and others, which was the big revolution 30 years ago, I think they're becoming it. When you have 250,000 people watching you, that's a problem.
Yeah, they have actually gone down the road to irrelevancy. And part of it is the immediacy of news. People aren't watching news anymore. They're getting information from their phones. They're getting news alerts. So by the time they sit down in front of a television set, they've already seen all the news. They've gotten the information they want. The news media knows this is happening. This is why virtually every newscast, local, national, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, they all have podcasts now. They're all doing on-demand video on their websites because they know the television news model is broken because people aren't sitting down to watch anymore. And even when they are, they're not really paying attention. They're also on their phones or on their tablets or doing something on the computer. So the attention span is not there, the audience is not there, and media is starting to adapt.
Okay, and here's the problem, though. There's people that are prime in the next revolution. Even if they're following suit, which is obviously the right business model to do, they're not prime in that area, and I think they still will shrink to irrelevancy. My last question, Dr. Lopkin, and for our listeners, is when business is business, AT&T got rid of CNN. Yep. They're floundering out there. Business is still business. I don't care if your agenda is the Uber left. Eventually, you get to a point where this is not making money anymore, which I believe they're at that point. There's no way you can have 250,000 viewers and be financially solvent. I'm sorry, you can just do the math. My question to you is, does it transition into a switch in ideology or not just carrying? Do they ever turn on Biden, or do you think it's beyond their capabilities?
I think they actually will. I mean, we're starting to see it. Again, as I mentioned about the Harris trip, both CNN and NPR turned on her. Prior to the trip, she did an interview with Lester Holt, and he started holding her feet to the fire. So, yes, I think they are going to start turning on the Democrats because that's where the audience is. They need to regain their credibility if anybody's going to watch. And if they don't have viewers, they don't have advertisers, they don't have money to stay in business.
Dr. Lopkin, thank you. Excellent edition of Carnivore Bites. We'll be back next Wednesday. And our listeners can access this us in many ways, can't they, Dr. Lopkin?
Yes, they can. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. Oh, and we have just been picked up by Amazon Music as well.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. Thank our listeners. We'll be back next week.
See you then. You've been listening to Carnivore Bites, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us every week on carnivoreradio.com, exvadio.com/podcast, the Apple Podcast Store, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you find podcasts.